Hello future people, Jason the Bruce here with Getting Tabled, and on today's Getting Tabled guide, we're discussing airbrush compressors. So airbrush compressors is another one of those topics that confuses a lot of people. Because at the end of the day, why should I spend more money on this when this one's cheaper and they both do the same job? Now, I know that there's a lot of people that answer this question and probably get tired of answering this question. Because honestly, as confusing as it is to a lot of new people, the answer is actually really simple. Yes, to some extent you can buy whatever you want. Truth be told, I've been using this, the one on this side, for about 6 or 7 years. It was dirt cheap. It was never great. There was nothing really wrong with it. And if you look in the image very carefully, you can see that it's filled with moisture. This should have been replaced easily 2 years ago. I've been talking for years about how I recommend airbrushing over using rattle cans, despite the fact that I've been using a garbage air compressor. Now, to be fair, it didn't start off as garbage, but it has not been good for a very long time. Recently, I purchased this one. Now, I've known that I wanted to buy a compressor with a tank for a very long time. And generally speaking, this is what I would recommend that you buy. An air compressor, to some extent, is an air compressor. If you really wanted to, you could buy neither of these and buy essentially an air compressor designed for a garage. There's a few things that you'll have to buy on top of it, but you could go down that line. In fact, there are some people that would suggest that it's the best move that you could make, especially if you're going to be using it for other things. The biggest downside of these mini compressors is that the motors are smaller and will burn out. This one will burn out a lot faster than this one will. In saying that, I've been using this one for at least 6 years. At least 3 years longer than most people expect them to last. I would not be expecting these to last that long. I would be suggesting to you that I got very lucky. On top of that, let's keep in mind that I just finished telling you that I should have replaced this 2 years ago. But that's not why. The biggest difference between these two, obviously, is the fact that this one doesn't have an air compressor tank. It's just the air compressor itself, which means in order to run your airbrush, it must be running all of the time. Constantly. Which means you've got much more noise, potentially annoying much more people, and when you're running it constantly, this is what's going to burn them out. Because the motors are so much smaller, they're not designed to be run like that, and that's what will kill them. The benefit of these ones is they have the tank. This is a 3-litre tank, which is fairly average. Sometimes you can get 4 on these mini ones, but it will fill up the tank first, and because the tank is full, it will only need to turn the motor on to refill the tank, and then the motor will shut itself off until it needs to refill again, and it'll keep a consistent pressure. The other big difference between these two is because this one has the tank, it can keep that pressure up consistently all the time. Now, that doesn't mean that you should be running it for hours and hours and hours. You do need to give them a break. The problem with these ones is because it has to run all the time, you get sputters and spurts as it's running, where it'll go brrr, brrr, brrr. It's not super obvious to the untrained eye, but it will kind of turn your airbrush on and off at a microscopic level, which can affect it. Depending on how precise you're trying to be. If you really want to get some precise stuff going, you really want to be using one of these. because the air pressure will be consistent and it won't change on you while you're using it. But to touch on something I mentioned a few minutes ago, if you're running your air compressor to run your airbrush and you want to have a bit of a marathon session and go for a while, you want to be giving these things a break after a little while to let the motors cool down. Especially with this one, because this is running the motor all the time. And you want to give it a break, because these things will heat up very, very quickly, and that's what will burn them out. So you want to give them a break to give it a rest. They're not designed to be used for hours and hours on end. They're just not designed for it. The other thing you don't want to do. Now, this is where I point out, again, this is the first air compressor I ever had. Ever. I've never really been a tool shed person, so I never owned one in the garage or anything like that. I never had a need for it. So, if you have air compressed, moisture will build up in that air, which is, hey, guess what? Where all of that moisture comes from. That's actually inside of the tank, and the reason why I should have replaced this a long time ago. There's water inside of it. Now, it's possible that I may actually be able to fix this. It's not worth fixing because I paid a very small amount of money for it. But in theory, you possibly could do that. You still want to keep in mind with this one, the same thing. So, when you're resting your air compressor, turn it off and decompress the air. Because if you leave it compressed, that's where you'll get your moisture. The moisture trap can only do so much. These things here on the end are the moisture traps. They're designed to catch the water before it goes through the hose. Now, in the case of this one, unfortunately, because it all filled up with water after a while, the moisture still managed to get through the hose and come through. And that's why I should have replaced this a long time ago. I actually had a second water trap at the end of my hose, which honestly is something that I would recommend. You can buy the little moisture traps to go on the end. That'll just sit at the end of your hose, and then you can plug your airbrush into the top of that. I would genuinely recommend one of these, because these moisture traps will only do so much, and it's good to have a little bit of a backup. But, in all honesty, you could buy either of these. But, by the time you pay for this, it's not that much more expensive to buy one of these. Both of these are essentially no-name brands. They're not specific to any airbrushes, they're standard sizes. So they will work with anything. But, honestly, if you're wanting to get into airbrushing, buy a compressor that has a tank attached to it. It will last you a lot longer. You will get a lot more reliable use out of it. It will be quieter. It's going to be a lot better for everything you want to use it for at the end of the day. However, if you already own a regular a regular compressor, you can 100% use that. 100%. Only things you're going to need to keep in mind. You're going to have to purchase one of those water traps separately, and you're going to have to get the attachments to step it down to the right sizing, and you're going to need a regulator that will regulate the pressure coming out of it, because if you put a standard airbrush compressor through your airbrush, you will ruin it instantly. It will not survive at all. Cheap or expensive, it just won't survive because it's not designed for it. So if you want to follow down that route, let me know. I may take people through that process in a future video if there's enough interest in it. In saying that, I hope this has been useful. Thank you very much for checking out this video. If you're enjoying the content of this channel, please like and subscribe. If you're in a position to do so, please check out patreon.com/gettingtabled. You receive early access to at least 80% of all videos that we put out, and you get access to the video edition of all of our podcasts the day that they're uploaded. If you'd like to check us out on social media, facebook.com/gettingtabled is the most active. We also have a Discord server. You can email our team at gettingtabled@gmail.com. If you're on either Twitter or Instagram, you can find us at gettingtabled. And until next time, play more games.